In the spring of 1954, Clint Eastwood was 4 months behind on rent, and his landlady had every legal right to evict him. She didn't. That decision and what Clint did 41 years later to repay it became one of those stories about kindness that waits decades to say thank you. Margaret Chen was 52 years old in 1954, a widow who owned a small apartment building in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles. 8 units. Nothing fancy. She'd bought it with the life insurance money after her husband died in 1948, and the rental income was how she survived. Margaret was Chinese American, born in San Francisco in 1902. She'd grown up in Chinatown, worked in her parents' laundry, married young to another Chinese American named Robert Chen. They'd moved to Los Angeles in the 1930s looking for opportunities that didn't exist for Chinese families in many places. In 1954 Los Angeles, being Chinese American meant she'd faced discrimination her entire life. There were neighborhoods where she couldn't buy property even if she had the money, jobs she couldn't get regardless of qualifications, restaurants where she wasn't welcome, banks that wouldn't give her loans. Her husband Robert had worked in a garment factory for 20 years, died of a heart attack at 48, left her with 2 young children and a small life insurance policy. Margaret took that insurance money and did something remarkable. She found a small 8-unit apartment building in the Fairfax district that the owner was willing to sell to her, one of the few who would. She became a landlady because it was one of the few ways she could build financial security without needing someone else to hire her, approve her, or give her permission to succeed. She was fair but firm with tenants. Rent was due on the 1st. Late by the 5th, you got a warning. Late by the 15th, you got an eviction notice. She couldn't afford to be generous. The building had a mortgage. There were property taxes, maintenance costs. One tenant not paying meant she had to cover their share from her own pocket. Clint Eastwood moved into Unit 4 Inches, January 1954. He just signed a contract player deal with Universal Studios, $40 a week. Not much, but steady. He could afford the $35 monthly rent on Margaret's apartment, a small studio with a kitchenette, bathroom, and a Murphy bed that folded into the wall. Clint paid January and February on time. Then March came, and he showed up at Margaret's door on the 5th. Rent was already late. Mrs. Chen, I need a few more days. Universal cut my contract early. I'm auditioning for other work, but nothing's come through yet. Margaret had heard versions of this story before. Everyone in Los Angeles was an actor or musician or writer who was between jobs, about to make it big, just needed a little more time. She'd heard promises from tenants who disappeared in the night, excuses from people who had no intention of ever paying. But she looked at Clint, young, probably mid-20s, polite, clearly embarrassed to be asking for an extension. He wasn't making excuses, wasn't blaming anyone, wasn't promising he'd be a star next month, just asking for a few more days, and clearly hating that he had to ask. Margaret thought about her own mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, thought about the property tax bill sitting on her desk, thought about her daughter's school expenses. Then she thought about what it felt like to need help and not get it. 1 week extension, but that's all I can do. A week later, Clint still didn't have the rent. He got a small part in a TV show that would pay eventually, but the check wouldn't come for weeks. He went to Margaret again. I can give you $10 now. That's all I have. But I've got work lined up. I just need a little more time. Margaret should have started eviction proceedings. That was the smart business decision. But something about Clint's situation reminded her of her own struggles. She'd been broke once. She knew what it felt like to be one paycheck away from losing everything. Keep the $10. You need to eat. Pay me when you can. March rent never came. April 1st arrived. Clint still didn't have money. He'd gotten a few small TV roles, but the pay was delayed. The studios paid weeks or sometimes months after filming. He was surviving on maybe $2 a day, eating as little as possible, trying to make it to the next paycheck. He avoided Margaret. When he saw her in the hallway or near the building, he'd take a different route. The shame of owing money and not being able to pay was eating at him. Finally, mid-April, Margaret knocked on his door. Clint opened it, expecting an eviction notice. Mr. Eastwood, you owe me 2 months' rent. That's $70. I know, I'm sorry, I've been trying. I'm not evicting you, Margaret interrupted, but we need to have an honest conversation. Can you pay this rent eventually? Yes, I've got 3 TV jobs that'll pay out by mid-May. I'll have the money then. Then here's what we'll do. You pay me when those checks come in, but you also need to eat and survive until then. So I'm not charging late fees. Just pay the rent you owe when you can. Clint was stunned. Why would you do this? You don't even know if I'm telling the truth. Margaret looked at him carefully. I've been a landlady for 6 years. I can tell the difference between someone gaming the system and someone who's genuinely trying. You're trying. So I'm giving you the chance to keep trying. May came. Clint got his checks from the TV work. Not much, maybe $80 total, enough to pay Margaret the $70 he owed plus May's rent. He went to her apartment with the money, started to apologize again. Margaret stopped him. You paid. That's what matters. Now we start fresh. But June was the same problem. Clint got a small part that would pay later. June rent didn't come on the 1st, or the 5th, or the 15th. Margaret should have evicted him this time. She'd given him a chance. He'd paid once, but now he was late again. Any reasonable landlord would start proceedings. She didn't. July came. Clint was now 3 months behind again. June, July, and August. First was approaching fast. In late July, Clint knocked on Margaret's door. He looked terrible, thinner than when he'd moved in, his clothes hanging loose, face drawn, exhausted, defeated. The look of someone who's been running on empty for too long. Mrs. Chen, I need to talk to you about the rent. Come in. They sat in her small living room. Margaret poured tea habit from her childhood, always offered tea to guests, even when discussing difficult things. Clint wrapped his hands around the cup like he needed the warmth. He explained the situation in detail. He was getting work, small roles in television shows, westerns mostly, but the entertainment industry payment system was brutal. Work in June, submit the paperwork, wait for accounting to process it, maybe get paid in August if you were lucky. Work in July, get paid in September. He was trapped in a cycle where he was always 2 months behind his income, always scrambling to survive until the next check cleared. I can move out if you need the unit for someone who can pay on time. I understand if you need to evict me. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about her own bills, the mortgage payment she'd have to cover, the property taxes due in September. Every month Clint didn't pay was money out of her own pocket. But she was also thinking about something else, about being Chinese American in 1954 Los Angeles, about all the times she'd needed a break and didn't get one because of her race, about all the doors that had been closed to her. How much do you owe me now? She asked. 3 months, $105. And you'll have money when? I've got a better role lined up. Should pay by end of August, maybe $120. Then here's what we'll do. You pay me when that check comes. We'll figure out a payment plan for what you owe. but I'm not evicting you. You need stability to work. Can't audition if you're worried about where you're sleeping. Clint's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by making something of yourself. That's all the thanks I need. In late August, Clint got his check. He paid Margaret everything he owed. June, July, August, and even September in advance. Over 4 months behind, finally caught up. Mrs. Chen, I need you to know this kept me from giving up. There were days I thought about leaving LA, going back north, getting a regular job, but you gave me enough stability to keep trying. You would have kept trying anyway. You've got that look. What look? The look of someone who won't quit. I just made it easier. Clint lived in that apartment for another year, always paid on time after that. When he moved out in 1955 to a slightly better place, he made sure to tell Margaret she'd made a difference. If I ever make it, I won't forget this. Don't make promises you might not keep. Just live well. They lost touch after that. Clint's career exploded. Rawhide spaghetti, westerns, Dirty Harry, directing stardom. Margaret kept managing her apartment building, raised her two children, watched tenants come and go. By 1995, Margaret was 93 years old. Her children had tried to get her to sell the apartment building and move into assisted living, but she was stubborn. She'd owned that building for 47 years. It was her independence. But 3-year-old landlady managing an 8-unit building was getting difficult. Things broke that she couldn't fix. Tenants had complaints she couldn't address. The neighborhood had changed. The building needed updates she couldn't afford. Her daughter Susan had been trying to convince her to sell, but Margaret didn't want to. Selling the building felt like admitting defeat, like giving up the thing she'd worked for. In November 1995, Susan got a phone call from someone claiming to work for Clint Eastwood. She assumed it was a scam. Mr. Eastwood would like to speak with your mother, Margaret Chen. He was a tenant of hers in 1954. Susan was skeptical, but gave her mother the number. Margaret called it, still not believing this was real. Mrs. Chen, this is Clint Eastwood. I lived in your building on Fairfax in 1954, Unit 4. Margaret was silent for a moment, reaching back 41 years, the young actor who couldn't pay rent. Clint laughed. That's me. I owed you 4 months' rent. You didn't evict me. You paid eventually. I did, but that's not why I'm calling. I heard you're thinking about selling the building. Margaret was surprised. How did you know that? I've kept track of you over the years, made sure you were doing okay. My assistant checks in periodically. I heard the building's getting to be too much, and you might sell. I don't want to sell, but I'm 93. It's getting difficult. What if you didn't have to sell? What if I bought the building from you for more than market value, then gave you a different house, single family, no maintenance, no tenants to live in for the rest of your life? Margaret didn't understand. Why would you do that? Because in 1954, you gave me 4 months to get on my feet when you had every right to evict me. You gave me stability when I had nothing. I told you if I ever made it, I wouldn't forget. I made it. I didn't forget. Over the next month, the transaction happened quickly and quietly. Clint's business manager handled the details, but Clint stayed involved personally. He bought Margaret's apartment building for $320,000, about $80,000 more than market value for a building that needed significant updates. He didn't negotiate the price down, didn't try to get a deal, just paid what would give Margaret financial security. Then he bought her a small 2-bedroom house in Alhambra. He'd looked at 12 different properties before finding this one, quiet neighborhood with other elderly residents. New construction, so nothing would break or need fixing. Everything on one level, no stairs, wide doorways, accessible bathroom, everything designed for a 3-year-old woman to live comfortably and safely. He put the house in her name, free and clear, no mortgage, no payments. Set up a trust that covered property taxes, utilities, and home maintenance for the rest of her life. She'd never have to worry about money again. He also arranged for a property management company to take over her old building so she didn't have to deal with tenant issues during the transition. In December 1995, Margaret moved into her new house. Clint came to see her settled in. Mr. Eastwood, Clint. Clint, this is too much. You didn't owe me this. I owed you exactly this. You let me stay when you couldn't afford to. Cost you money you didn't have. I can afford this now, so I'm paying you back. It's been 41 years. Good debts don't have expiration dates. Margaret lived in that house for 3 more years. She died peacefully in 1998, 2 weeks before her 96th birthday. At her funeral, Clint attended. He gave a brief eulogy. Margaret Chen was my landlady for 18 months in 1954 and 1955. For 4 of those months, I couldn't pay rent. She had every reason to evict me. She chose not to. She chose to give a struggling actor the stability he needed to keep trying. That decision changed my life. Without those 4 months of grace, I don't know if I'd have made it in this industry. Margaret never asked for recognition, never told anyone what she'd done. She just quietly helped someone who needed help. That's the definition of character. After Margaret died, Susan found a box of old papers in her mother's belongings. Inside was a ledger from the apartment building, the rent records from 1954 to 1955. Next to Clint Eastwood's name for June, July, August, and September, 1,954. Margaret had written in pencil, paid eventually, good kid, will make it someday. Susan shared this with Clint. He had it framed. It hangs in his office to this day. Here's what those 4 months in 1954 teach us. Margaret Chen didn't have extra money to spare. She was a widow supporting herself and 2 children with rental income. Every month Clint didn't pay, she had to cover his share. That hurt her financially. But she saw someone genuinely struggling and made a choice. Give him time, give him stability, trust that he'd pay when he could. That choice cost her in the short term. It repaid her 41 years later in ways she couldn't have imagined. Clint could have forgotten. 41 years is a lifetime. Margaret was a landlady from his struggling years. Most people wouldn't remember, wouldn't feel obligated. But Clint did remember. And when he heard she was struggling with the burden of the building she'd owned for nearly 5 decades, he found a way to give her the same gift she'd given him, security and stability when it mattered most. That's the lesson. The grace we extend to others when they're struggling often costs us something, but the memory of that grace can last a lifetime and return in unexpected ways. Not because we expect repayment, but because some people never forget who helped them when they had nothing. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness given in hard times echoes across decades and sometimes comes home transformed into something beautiful.